Okay, welcome back. Thank you for joining me in today's session, Infosec Controls, where we'll take a look at authentication, authorization, and accounting. So for today's session, it will be suitable for someone who is sitting for the ISC2 CC exam, as well as the CompTIA Security Plus exam. Alright, let's quickly take a look at the concepts. Okay, so the first thing we shall look at is authentication. So authentication shouldn't be a foreign concept to a lot of us because it's something that we associate a lot with cybersecurity, passwords. Okay, before we can talk about authentication, we first have to understand the concept of identity. So an identity is what a person is. So for example, it could be a person's name. It could also be an email. And that is what makes a person that person itself. And how do we authenticate or verify the identity of the subject? So normally we use three different methods. So the first method is what you know. And an example of it would be passwords. So you would supply your email, which is your identity, and you would supply the password for that email account. And that proves that you are, or that proves that that email belongs to you. And so that's the that's authentication at play here. The second form of authentication is what you have. And in this case, it could be that two-factor token, or nowadays, a lot of it's in the phone as a soft token itself. And you press on the token and it will give you, a 6-digit number that you can enter in. And it proves that you are in possession of that phone, and thus, it verifies your identity. So this is yet another way of authentication. And the last one is what you are. And for this particular mode of authentication, normally we will look at things such as fingerprints, as well as your iris scan, biometric. So it's what you are, and you cannot change your fingerprint or change your iris. And that once again proves that the identity of the subject that you're authenticating is as. Okay, so once we have looked at authentication, the next step we would have to look at is authorization. And that is about verifying the access that the subject actually has. So frequently there will be this object called an access control list, or an ACL for short. And what that actually serves is, it will actually state, for example, a certain identity such as, let's say X at Gmail, he has access to, let's say, HR documents, since he's a HR. And maybe H at Gmail, he has access to, let's say, finance records, since he's in the finance department, so on and so forth. So you actually specify who has access to which kind of what kind of objects in the organization itself. And yet another form of access control list is something that is assigned to a role. So instead of having a person an identity directly tied to the files themselves, we assign a role to the files. So for example, for a role-based access control list, or RBAC for short, we would say that the HR group has, or the HR role has access to all these various folders that that contain the HR documents. And for example, the finance role has access to yet other documents that that belong to the finance department. And then from the role itself, you will actually map out to the user. So X at Gmail belongs to the HR group, H at Gmail belongs to the finance group. And you could have multiple people that are assigned to the same group as well, So maybe we have C at Gmail, which is assigned to the HR group as well. And the benefit of doing RBAC, or role-based access control, is it's easier for management. So when someone actually leaves a particular organization, you can just cancel off his access to this particular group, and he wouldn't have access to all the documents anymore. Whereas if there are multiple documents that are all assigned individually to that user, then we would have to go step by step and take away the access one by one. So this is actually RBAC, or role-based access control. It's a lot more frequently used compared to the other access control lists where permissions are actually given to each individual identity. Okay, so that sums up what authorization is about. And finally, we look at accounting. So accounting is also very important because, for example, X at Gmail may have access to all the HR documents, But that doesn't mean that every single document that he has accessed is legitimate, is legitimately for business use. For example, X@Gmail may not have any business to access, let's say, the CEO's salary, but out of curiosity, he accessed it. If such behavior occurs, we would want to lock down such behavior so that we can take subsequent action against X for overstepping the boundaries and accessing something that he's not allowed to, even though he was given the authorization to do so. And that's the importance of accounting. And finally, we look at non-repudiation. So once we talk about responsibility such as this, there's always a possibility that someone may try to deny that they did not do a particular action. For example, X may deny that he did not access the CEO's salary. And if we have accounting, and if the logging is in a way that is non-reputable, then there is no doubt that we can tie it to X. Okay, so all these that we have looked at so far, authentication, authorization, and accounting, are all known as this thing called controls. And if we tie it back to what we've looked at the previous session, which is CIA, which are the objectives of information security. So how do we tie these controls back to the objectives? So the simple way of looking at it is that controls help to enforce or to maintain CIA. So for example, if we authenticate X, make sure that X has the correct password, has the correct two-factor authentication before we give him access. And then after we have given him access, we actually check authorization. So we check what files has X got access to, and is X trying to access something that he is able to access. And if so, we allow the access. And this actually maintains CIA, confidentiality, because nobody else apart from someone such as X from the HR group can access that information. Integrity as well, because no one can modify. If they can't access, we also will not allow them to modify. And availability as well, because if we just allow anybody to access it, they can delete the files, they can move the files, and it will not be available for legitimate use, such as for X to access anymore. So controls such as authentication, authorization, and finally accounting help to enforce and help to maintain CIA, which we covered in the previous session. And this is how everything actually ties together. Alright, let's move on to the first question. Alright, in the first question, it states that a user enters a username and password to log into a corporate VPN. Which AAA component is being performed here? So the keywords here is username and password. So as we have covered in the previous slide, it's the very first step, which is authentication. So the username is the identity here. So they are trying to log in as X@Gmail or whatever identity it is, and the password proves the identity, that this is indeed who it is that is trying to log in. And this whole process is called authentication. So the answer for this is A. Moving to question 2. After logging in, a user is allowed to access the finance system but not the HR system. Which AAA concept best explains this control? So for this question, we look at they are allowed to access one particular system but not the other system. So this ties into the access control list that we were talking about earlier, the ACL. For example, this particular user X can only access the finance, and maybe the user Y can access HR. So if X tries to access HR, it will be denied. So this is authorization. X is only authorized to access the finance system in this case. Why is this not authentication? Because after logging in, the user has already logged in, so it's no longer authentication. And why is this not accounting? Because there's no mention of any logging taking place. Okay, moving on to question 3. Which activity best represents accounting in the AAA model? So if you look at the first one, verifying a user's identity with a biometric. So we've explained this. This is actually what you know. Oh, sorry, this is what you are. And this is under authentication. Granting read-only access to a database. This probably maintains integrity, but it's nothing to do with what we are discussing today. So why read-only access prevents integrity is because there are broadly speaking quite a number of different types of accesses. So there is read-only, which means you cannot change or you cannot modify anything else. And then there is read and write, which means you are allowed to modify. read only, you are not allowed to modify, and read and write, you are allowed to modify. So like that, and this is no. Okay, so if you only grant read-only access to a database, it means that that person cannot actually modify anything, and you actually preserve the integrity of the information in that database. Recording users' login times and commands executed. This definitely is under accounting. So we are logging who has accessed it, the person, the subject or the person involved, and we are logging the commands executed or what they have done. So for example, we logged all the information. X has accessed, employee A's, let's say salary record, and X has accessed, let's say the CEO salary record. And if he's only supposed to access employee A, for example, employee has just joined the company and he was caught accessing the CEO salary, then that would not be a good outcome, and we would need something like this, an accounting control to actually detect that this is happening. So the answer here is actually C. Okay, question 4. An organization wants to ensure that a user cannot later deny having approved a financial transaction. Okay, so cannot deny and a financial transaction. So this is something that is rather, I would say, important transaction. Something that we really want to preserve the non-repudiation kind of control. And they are asking which control most thoroughly supports this requirement. So what they are looking for here is non-repudiation. Okay, first one, access control list. We've covered this. This is under authorization, so this is not what it is. Hashing. Hashing is a lot to do with integrity, maintaining the integrity of the of the transactions itself, but not really to do with non-repudiation. We can cover hashing a lot more in a separate topic. Digital signatures, and finally role-based access control. So role-based access control and access control actually, it's similar. It's just role-based and so on. So it's actually also parked under authorization. And by process of elimination, we've arrived at C as our answer. But what are actually digital signatures, and why do they provide non-repudiation? So if we just look at signatures in general, a signature, what it does is it sort of assures that the that document or transaction not modified since it was signed, and also it assures that the signing user has actually approved or is alright with this particular document or transaction. And so this actually feeds into non-repudiation, because the document was actually signed by the user and it was not modified since then, so he cannot actually repudiate or cannot deny that it was him that signed. So we'll take a look a little bit more into detail into this slightly later, but how it's achieved is via something called asymmetric encryption, where there is both a private key and a public key. And since only that user has access to his private key, and that private key is actually used to sign, the public key is actually used to verify, that proves that only that user would have performed this transaction. So in this case, it is actually C. Okay, moving on to the next question. Which of the following best demonstrates non-repudiation? Okay, very, very similar to the previous one. Encrypting emails using AES. Okay, so AES is actually what is known as a symmetric cipher. Meaning, instead of having a separate public and private key, it only has one single key. Only one single encryption key. And this is used to both so this is only one. And this is used to both encrypt as well as decrypt, using the same key. And in this case, there is no non-repudiation. You can imagine, for example, if the sender actually encrypted it with the same key, and the recipient uses the same key to decrypt it, there's nothing stopping the recipient from using that key to actually encrypt it. So we can the sender can argue that, he didn't send it, it's the recipient who encrypted it, so this definitely out. This AES or symmetric keys cannot provide non-repudiation. Logging failed login attempts, this is more of accounting. Okay, finally we look at digital signatures and the user's private key again. So as mentioned earlier, in digital signatures, there are two keys, the private and the public. And the private key only stored, kept a secret. Only stored by the user and is kept as a secret. So if no one else has access to the private key, the user cannot blame it on anyone else to have encrypted it or to have signed that particular document. In this case, again, it's C. Alright, moving on to question 6. A centralized logging system records all administrators' actions for audit purposes. Which security concept does this most thoroughly support? Again, you see the keywords audit, you see the keywords logging. Definitely this falls under accounting over here. Yep. So we are basically tracking all the actions that are happening. Actions here, yep. All the actions and anything that they may be authorized to do, they may be authorized, but maybe they didn't have a legitimate business purpose for doing it. We want to track that, and it helps to ensure information security. Yep. All right, question 7. A user authenticates successfully but is denied access to a specific file due to insufficient privileges. Which AAA component caused the access denial? So we are looking at the denial. So they authenticated successfully, so it cannot be authentication. We are looking for the denial. It has to be one of the following. So accounting, there is no denying any access in accounting. Accounting is just log every single action taken. So by process of elimination, it has to be authorization. So how does it work here? The user is denied access to a specific file due to insufficient privileges. Again, if you look at the ACLs again, I'll draw the same table. X has access to, let's say, finance, and Y has access to HR. So currently what's happening is that, X has authenticated successfully. This is good. But he's trying to access something that he doesn't have access to. For example, he's trying to access HR, and he's not a member of the HR department, and that causes that denial to happen. So this is authorization here, B. Alright, moving on to question 8. Which technology best enables non-repudiation for electronic transactions? Okay, we see the exact same keywords again, digital certificate and PKI here. Okay, so I've explained symmetric encryption in the previous question. AES is a symmetric cipher. There is only one key, and the key is used to perform encryption and decryption. So we cannot do non-repudiation because anybody with access to the key could have sent the message out. Okay, access control list, again, this is authorization. And one-time passwords, maybe this would be under, I would guess, authentication. And this leaves us with digital certificates and PKI. So we've explained digital certificates quite a bit. So let's take a look at what PKI is. So PKI is actually a public key infrastructure. And what this means is that there's a server that will save everybody's public key in here. And what happens is, let's say, okay, our server is here, our recipient is here, and our sender is here. So what the sender will have is, the sender will have his own private key. And then he will take this private key to encrypt his message. Only he will have his own private key. Everybody has their own private key and they never share it. Okay, so once this, and he will use the private key to actually sign his message. And once it is signed, he will actually send the message over to the recipient. Okay, so once the recipient has received the message, he can verify the signature by downloading the sender's public key. So the recipient will know this came from, let's say, X. And the recipient would then, send a request to the server and ask for, can I get the public key for X? And then the server would reply with the public key. And then the recipient can verify by using the public key to actually verify the signature. So we have this concept of a certificate here, and a certificate is very similar to a public key. So a private key is also known as a key. A public key is sometimes referred to as a certificate. Yep. So that's about it for this question, B. Okay, question 9. Which scenario combines accounting and non-repudiation? Okay, so there are two concepts in here, accounting and non-repudiation. User logs in using MFA. This is, I think, authentication. Yep, there's no Nothing else in here. Yep. A system encrypts data in transit. This is encryption. This is, promotes confidentiality. Yep. When we move to C, okay, this is something that, slightly more interesting. So an audit log records digitally signed administrative actions. So we first take a look at audit log, and immediately, accounting fits into audit logs. So does digitally signed administrative actions fit into non-repudiation? Yeah, we have just, talked about digital signatures, the PKI, and everything like that in the previous few questions. So what is happening here is, let's say, you have an admin, and he performs a number of actions. Let's say, he logs into user A's PC, he logs into, let's say, user B's PC, he logs into the let's say the CEO's PC, and all this is digitally signed using, every single action is digitally signed using the admin's private key and then logged in the audit log. And what this aims to achieve is to uncover misuse. So for example, if there is a legitimate business reason to log into users A PC, for example, there's a ticket assigned, there's a ticket involved, and maybe user A forgot his password, and the admin had to log in and reset. Maybe there's a legitimate reason to log into users B PC. Maybe user B needed a particular software, and the admin had to log in to install the software. And maybe that there might not be a legitimate reason to log into the CEO's PC. And so this will be logged, and this will be uncovered when an audit takes place. Why did this access happen? Was it a misuse of his powers or his credentials? So that's the importance of doing proper accounting. Okay, so for this it will be C. And finally, we look at question 10. Which statement best distinguishes authentication from non-repudiation? Okay, so two different topics, two different concepts here: authentication and non-repudiation. So let's take a look at the answers one by one. Authentication verifies identity. This is correct. While non-repudiation prevents unauthorized access. Nope, this is not correct. What prevents unauthorized access? Authorization does that. Okay. Authentication controls access. Not exactly. I believe this would be more authorization. It controls what you can have access to. Non-repudiation logs users' activity. Not exactly correct again. Logging users' activities is accounting. So this is wrong as well. Authentication confirms who performed an action. Sounds correct. Yep. Because we can confirm the identity of the person that performed the action, so this is correct. While non-repudiation provides proof that they can't deny it. This is correct as well. So this looks like our answer here for question 10. And let's quickly take a look at the last option here. Authentication requires encryption. Not really. I mean, we've shown that authentication is actually what we know, what we have, and what we are. So not really. Yeah. So this is not correct as well. Yeah. So yeah, the answer for question 10 is C. Okay, that's about it, and I hope that you've managed to actually get something from this session here. And thank you for watching, and do subscribe if you liked it. Thank you. Bye.